Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Welcome, everybody, to the Wasatch Report. I am Suzanne Sherman, your host for the next hour here on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Today is March 9th, year of our Lord 2018. We are live 717-467-1736. Hey, Jeff, I hear some noise in the background. Can we see what we can do about that? Thank you. And you can follow us on Facebook.com. That's our producer, Jeff Johnson, by the way, who's the host of The Paradigm Shift. He's one of the founders of our network. He will be chiming in today because we are going to be getting into Jeff Sessions and his war against federalism. And I know he's going to want to have a lot to say about that as well. You can find us on Facebook.com/Suzanne Sherman, Cowgirl Esquire. I have to be silenced on there for about 4 more days. But if you send me some messages during the show, if you want to contribute, I can read private messages. I just cannot respond to them, but I can answer them on the phone. We also have a Facebook page, Cerberus Radio Network, and a CRN fan page. I'm trying very hard to get people to come over to Gab, GAB.AI. I have an account there, Cowgirl Esquire, Suzanne Sherman. You can find me there. Jeff Johnson's there, as well as some of the other members of the network. And it would be really nice to be able to go over there without the left-leaning censorship that we are experiencing on Facebook. I always say, if somebody doesn't want your business, for heaven's sake, don't do business with them. But it's really hard because we have, these leftist social media conglomerates having a monopoly. And it's really difficult to get people to switch over. We also have a YouTube channel, speaking of censorship and conglomerates, but we're doing the best we can. Cerberus Radio Network, and we're encouraging you to please subscribe, share it with your friends. All of our shows are up on YouTube there, and you can listen to us also on an Android platform. Look us up on CRN. By the way, also my shows from our old channel are still being played on the Veritas Radio Network, and I heard my first one last night. I had when it was, I think, May 20th of 2015 with Kevin Gutzman was on there with me. And Jeff, I had to stop listening to it. I remembered how nervous I was for that show. And I think we've all come a long way since then. You can also hear me Tuesday mornings. I co-host Inside the News on K-Talk Radio, 1640 AM here in the Salt Lake area in Utah. And if you miss any of those episodes, you can get them from the archives. You can also stream live on ktopmedia.com. This Wednesday, I will be joining my good friend Greg Carpenter, host of Reverse Deception over on the Veritas Radio Network, aka the Crusade channel. Next Thursday is a really big day for us here at the Cerberus Radio Network. I will be having Dan Fisher, who is running for the governor of Oklahoma on a platform of abolishing human abortion. I've been talking about our federalist system and how it has been converted illegally into a national system. This is an opportunity for a showdown. It's literally a matter of not only federalism, but life and death. 60 million dead babies and counting so far. He is willing to stop that, at least in the state of Oklahoma. If you're unconvinced, listen to the show, hear what he has to say, listen to my other shows, listen to what Jeff says as well as Mike and Justin from the other side. They talk about this as much as I do. And they all recently had a show about Lincoln, and Jeff Sessions mentioned Abraham Lincoln in his pretty much declaration of war against the state of California yesterday. So this Saturday, a week from this Saturday on the 17th, I will be addressing a group at the Sons of Confederate Veterans Education Conference in Platteville, Alabama. This is a huge honor for me. Brian McClanahan is on the bill as well. He is from the Abbeville Institute. He's also the author of numerous books, including the latest, How Alexander Hamilton Screwed Up America. That is arriving in my little mailbox today, so I'm going to be reading that as well. Friday, March 23rd, I am returning to K-Talk Media in the afternoon drive show Shooting You Straight with Maxon and Platts. Shiloh and I are going to be talking about political correctness and cultural Marxism, as well as the Doctor of Implied Powers. That was the reason, actually, I bought this book about Alexander Hamilton. So I'm really looking forward to going on there. Jeff, you probably recall when I was on that show last time when Kevin Gutzman appeared with us, at the very last minute of the show, we had somebody call on and address my concerns about the constitutional authority for the FBI to even exist, let alone enforce unconstitutional federal laws. As I've said before, according to the Constitution, the general government was granted the authority to punish 3 crimes and 3 crimes only: treason, piracy on the high seas, and counterfeiting. Marijuana, immigration does not fall into those categories. And he said I was absolutely clueless about this concept. So I told Shiloh, how about if I come back and we focus on this entire doctrine of implied powers, which, as John Taylor of Caroline said, without a written constitution or a constitution by implication is really no constitution at all. And that's really what we are seeing today. So I'm going to address the issue of Sessions and his very heated rhetoric in California, but we have some late breaking news here in Utah that I wanted to share with you. And this came out on March 7th, and a teen was drawn to ISIS, and he brought a homemade bomb, not a gun. He brought a homemade bomb to a Utah school. This took place in St. George. That's in southern Utah. Teenage students, and this was from NBC News. There's an article there. We'll post that article on our CRN news page. Perhaps you can do that for me, Jeff. A teenage student at a southern Utah high school has been charged with bringing a homemade bomb to the school that was discovered in a backpack emitting smoke and prompted an evacuation, police said Tuesday. The boy was arrested Monday night after Pineview High School in the city of St. George was evacuated for 2 hours while the FBI and a bomb squad investigated, and the police declined to identify the arrested teen or give his age. Authorities said additional charges are also pending against the teen as a suspect in the raising of the Islamic State group's flag on a pole at another Utah high school last month after the Florida mass shooting that was followed by numerous other threats around the U.S. I'm going to digress for just a moment, Jeff. How much do you want to bet this kid would have been in custody if he had raised the Virginia battle flag, or if he had raised a "Don't Tread on Me" flag above the high school? I think he would have made national, pardon my French, headlines had he done such a thing. No one was hurt Monday after the backpack was found in a common area of the school, and a student reported it to the teacher. The boy was arrested and booked into a detention center on charges of manufacture, possession, sale, use, or attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction. No one was hurt, no damage was reported, and the school reopened Tuesday morning for class. Based on, I'm going to quote the police now, based on our investigation, we can confirm this was a failed attempt to detonate a homemade explosive at the school. It was also determined that the male had been researching information and expressing interest in ISIS and promoting the organization. Now, Jeff, as a result of the tragedy in Florida, there has been a discussion on the many missed opportunities of local law enforcement, the school itself, and the FBI to catch this individual despite many, many red flags. And I'm seeing that we have a similar situation here. I think if we start researching how to make homemade bombs and supporting ISIS and promoting that on our social media and to our friends, that is a red flag. And once again, we have a systemic failure. Yet the rhetoric that we're seeing, we had walkouts, I believe, on the 7th. In Florida, they're having a die-in protesting the NRA. We need to look at what is really the common denominator here. What I'm trying to get people to understand is we need to shift the dialogue away from the guns, because as we know, confiscation of firearms is the end game for these progressives. And that's what they're trying to do. So we're not going to hear a lot from this story because a gun was not used. It was a bomb. And when we talk about situations where we have other weapons of mass destruction, like bombs here, it takes away from what the dialogue should be. What is inherently wrong with our government schools? I partially answered my own question there. They are government schools. What is it also wrong with the fact that they are soft targets? Now, in Utah, they are not gun-free zones, probably why he didn't see a gun here and he had to do something surreptitiously. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it wrong? What is wrong particularly with these males, and why are they returning to the schools to unleash their anger, and why are they doing this? In my other shows, we've also talked about the role of psychotropic drugs. So try and follow this as the facts emerge, but we really have to turn our attention to the fault in the school system itself, how we are failing our children, how we are turning our attention from being successful in our careers, but unsuccessful as parents. So we really need to look hard at that. Jeff, before I turn into the discussion of Jeff Sessions in California, did you want to say anything about that topic?
Well, it's just interesting that you brought up the whole idea of gun control. And I just posted a thing on Cerberus about the die-in. It has a picture of it, and it's an article about the die-in. And on it, I said that they're talking about raising the age to 21 so youth can't buy guns. Well, if that's the case, then according to the statistics I found on some highway site, 11 teens die every day because of distracted driving due to cell phones and texting. So that's like 4,000 plus teens or kids that die every day, a year, driving and texting. So if they're going to raise the age to 21 to get a gun, they need to raise the age for the driver's licenses to 21. They need to raise the age for children to get phones till 21. And because obviously that's the magic number that makes you responsible enough to do anything. So they need to just control every aspect of life up until 21, and we'll all be safe. Let's just give up a little liberty for a little bit of safety.
We should also raise the enlistment age to 21. So maybe we should think about that, because clearly if they're not mentally able to handle a firearm, they shouldn't be sent around the world to kill people, either on behalf of our overlords. Speaking of overlords, let's turn our attention to Jeff Sessions. I've never liked him. Now I really don't like him. For those that are new to the show, and as we discussed the other day and posted about this on Facebook, our listenership has grown tremendously, and we are absolutely delighted. So I'm going to back up the truck for a minute and let people know where I'm coming from this. And Jeff talks about our founding era as well. And what we try to let people know, going back to the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson said that these colonies are and ought to be free and independent states. A state didn't mean then what we consider it to mean now. A state then was considered at the time on a par with England, France, and Spain, for instance. So when he said these states ought to be, or these colonies ought to be free and independent states, they were talking about 13 sovereign and independent states. King George signed a treaty listing them separately. They formed a voluntary union called the Articles of Confederation, where they maintained their sovereignty. They had another mini revolution. This was a bloodless coup, and this was 1787. They came together to form a new government, which was supposed to be really just an improvement under the Articles. But what happened was we had a general government that was formed that had enumerated powers. Anything that this government legislated upon the sovereign independent states who did not give up their sovereignty, contrary to some of the nationalists. I hear this all the time, and I think you do too, Jeff, that while the states surrendered their sovereignty when they joined the Union, there was another guy actually on C-SPAN who I think he had written a book on nullification. I don't remember the exact topic, but this is a professor on C-SPAN who said that the states and a nation came together to form a compact. And I think Kevin Gutzman said that would be like being president, a party to your own conception. We'll leave that visual alone. But this just illustrates the misunderstanding that is so widespread. The states never surrendered their sovereignty. The government existed for very limited purposes, essentially to form a common defense. So foreigners looking in would be dealing with a single entity. Within the states, they would essentially have a free trade zone and then coming together for a common defense as well. So this is going to be the common thread for everything that we discuss and how we analyze current events. We would always say, and this still holds true, Cerberus Radio Network, 18th century ideas for 21st century thinkers. If we take these policies, these principles, and apply them to today's issues, we can see the solution quite clearly. But a lot of people don't want to do that because they think that this federal government is now supreme over everything, and the states are merely superfluous. They're subsidiaries, mere subsidiaries of a nation. That was not what we were intended to be. In fact, that was out and out rejected. So if you want to comment, Jeff, really quickly, if you want to, otherwise I'm going to turn to this article.
Go ahead and turn to the article. We'll talk about it as the article goes on.
Okay, my blood was boiling when I heard this report. Jeff Sessions was in Sacramento the other day, and he was speaking before a crowd of law enforcement officers in a state he had just accused of violating the Constitution. Boy, if that's not calling the kettle black. Attorney General Jeff Sessions excoriated California and some of its state and local leaders Wednesday for passing laws and taking action that he said obstruct immigration enforcement and put officers in danger. And this is what we see, an excuse for many overreaching laws at every level, actually, is safety or keeping law enforcement officers out of harm's way. Getting back to the article, in an unusually strident speech that emphasized the supremacy of the federal government by referencing Abraham Lincoln and secession, Sessions said California's actions directly and adversely impact the work of our federal officers and undermine the duly established immigration law in America. He took particular aim at Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf for warning constituents last month about an impending raid by Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents, alleging that her comments prevented authorities from making 800 arrests. And he said he plans to use the full might of the federal government to bring her state in line. Do those words remind you of any events in our history, Jeff?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at my thing, I called it going full Lincoln. That's a little play on words with that whole full semi thing.
Oh, my goodness. Well, California, and this is Jeff Sessions, California absolutely appears to me is using every power it has, power it doesn't have, to frustrate federal law enforcement, Sessions said. So you can be sure I'm going to use every power I have to stop them. Well, his power to stop them doesn't exist in this circumstance here. And it's kind of a conundrum when I find myself siding with the people of the People's Republic of California. But when he says that they don't have constitutional authority, they absolutely do. I'll turn to my article about the constitutional solution to immigration. But again, this is a quintessential 10th Amendment idea. And this is an example of a federal government that cannot deal with the fact that we have a federal as opposed to a national government. And we're seeing these conflicts now. And that's one of the reasons the timing is so great to have Dan Fisher on next week, because that's another issue with abortion. So immigration, abortion, these are all symptoms of what happens when we have a national government. So let me return to what he's saying. The comments at the California Peace Officers Association gathering in Sacramento came a day after the Justice Department sued the state of California. So we do have a lawsuit now alleging that 3 recently passed laws that benefit undocumented immigrants are unconstitutional. I think I discussed those the last time we were on the air. The lawsuit, which seeks, to block the laws, represents a major escalation of the Attorney General's crackdown on sanctuary jurisdictions, as it drew swift criticism from state leaders who insisted that their laws would pass legal muster. And guess what? They are right. Now, will they be upheld? And this is where we're going to play a clip in a little while about how it's kind of crazy to assume that the general government is going to rein itself in. Sessions' comments also sharpen a burgeoning feud between the U.S. government and the most populous and anti-Trump state. Soon after he was finished speaking, Trump campaign messaged supporters about the issue in an email with the subject line, "California versus the law." Well, again, this is the problem when we have top officials in the national government not understanding the very role that they are supposed to fulfill according to a constitution that they took an oath to uphold. And we see this time and time again. They take an oath to uphold a document without having any understanding or comprehension for what it means. Americans, here's the email from Trump's administration, Americans across the country can now see that Democrats have officially become the party of obstruction, lawlessness, government shutdowns, and of putting illegal immigrants before American citizens. Now, last week I had Jim Bovard on and we discussed Waco and decided that given the recent revelations of the corruption in the FBI, we need to re-examine the legitimacy of the FBI and the corrupt nature. I mean, look at what happened with the FBI, with the DOJ and Loretta Lynch, whose name I could not remember the other week. And I also have an article I'll try and get to with Struck, where he was saying how they absolutely hate the anti-abortion movement, the pro-life movement, where they were going to lie about snow and revoke their permit. So we are seeing corruption. We're seeing incompetence from the federal government every single step of the way. So let me return to the article really quickly, and then I'm going to analyze all the constitutional implications that this raises here. So a sheriff is saying that this conflict here represents a potential for some clarification that is desperately needed. I think I'll just send them my article from the 10th Amendment Center on the constitutional solution to immigration. It's like a child getting diametrically opposing directives from his parents. What is the child to do? Sheriffs do not wish to act as immigration police. And this is important because this has an implication of commandeering, where local law officials are expected to fulfill the needs and roles of government policies and enforcing them. So let's see, the sheriff is saying, we need to continue to cooperate with our law enforcement partners, meaning the federal government, especially as it relates to the release of offenders from our jails, to ensure that those who victimize our communities are not given unnecessary opportunities to do more harm. So here we have an issue of a federal policy that is in contravention to what the government of the state of California is doing. And a friend of mine said, you know, somebody should ask the people of California, do they really like having all these criminals warned and set free to commit crimes within their state? But again, we're talking about California. Let me give you the voices. I have some quotes of some of the people that live there. Outside the hotel, the article says, the mood was more combative. A few hundred demonstrators rallied in Sacramento's downtown core, listening to speeches and then pouring into the street, forcing police on horseback to divert traffic. A 33-year-old from Sacramento, he's an art producer and a consultant, was among those protesting and said those were gathering were motivated and angry that Sessions came to the city. We're here to show that immigrants are vital to our community. And here again is where we have an example of immigration as a whole, including illegal immigration. They don't differentiate. But again, this is an issue for the states, according to the Constitution as ratified, to decide for themselves. And I'll get into that in a little bit. Sacramento City Councilman Eric Guerra, and he also came to this country illegally. So in California, you can come here illegally and you can be a city council member. They recently held that if you're here illegally, you can also practice law in the state of California. So you take an oath to uphold laws in the state, even though you broke them from the get-go. Anyway, he said that there is a full frontal disregard for our belief as an inclusionary city, and that recognizes diversity. State leaders are girded for battle. So what I'm trying to make here, the point I'm trying to make here is this is what the people of California want. This was the same thing and why I left California, this matter of federalism. If you don't like what they're doing, move with your feet. I got sick and tired of the issues that I was seeing in California. Same thing with the firearms laws. I was never going to be able to effectuate a change with my vote. So I left and I came here to Utah. When you do this, these sort of situations will sort themselves out if we can get the general government to mind its own business. Jerry Brown said the Trump administration is full of liars. Well, I'm sure the funny thing is I don't think Jerry Brown ever said that about Obama or Hillary Clinton, even though she never made it into office. She lied throughout her whole campaign and continued to do so after the fact, but we all know that. He called on Sessions to apologize for bringing the mendacity of Washington to California. And here's what's funny. I find that the two are typically in lockstep with each other, regardless of what party's in office. I think if Hillary Clinton had been saying the same thing, they would have been embracing her. So he said the Justice Department was a political stunt, and he said it was ironic that Sessions, who is from Alabama, talked about secession. So Sessions, he said, was initiating a reign of terror. And one thing that I wanted to say, too, is, we have in California a recent incident of Kate Steinle, who was murdered in cold blood by an illegal immigrant there who had been deported, I believe, 5 times. She was just shot in broad daylight, and California, the prosecutor overcharged her. So the jury really had no choice but to acquit her. But again, what I say time and time again, the end run is gun control. So he did receive, I believe, a 4-year sentence on a gun charge. And that was it. So let's get to the really inflammatory part here right now. Sessions' speech touched on themes similar to those who have followed his career. And again, when he said he was going to double down on civil asset forfeitures and enforce federal marijuana laws, again, which is not one of the 3 they were granted to criminalize, I knew that the swamp was not going to go anywhere. So his speech touched on themes similar to those who have followed his career in the Senate and as Attorney General: rising violent crime, respect for law enforcement, and illegal immigration. But his remarks were notable in their aggressiveness. And if you remember last week, I had Tom Mullen join me, and one of the points he made was really that conservatives are also the party of big government. They want to conserve what we have, which is a big, over-bloated government, and they want to embrace and enforce the rule of law, whether or not it's constitutional. And that's why we see so many people backing these laws and the authority of the federal government, even though they have no such authority to enforce immigration laws or even create them from the very beginning. So here is what he was saying: there is no nullification. There is no secession. Federal law is the supreme law of the land. I would invite any doubters to go to Gettysburg or to the tombstones of John C. Calhoun and Abraham Lincoln. This matter has been settled. That is very threatening rhetoric, in my opinion, because what happened here? He's citing Gettysburg and he's citing Lincoln. Lincoln went to war over an issue of secession, and we lost 850,000 Americans, according to revised census estimates over an illegal war. I want to have you guys, if you're interested in more details on this, go to The Other Side. Justin and Mike did a great show on that episode, and they do list the topics on there. So I don't know if they're on our Cerberus network page, but I know they have a YouTube page, The Other Side, and we should repost that again, given the rhetoric that we're hearing right now. So what I'm going to do is start picking this apart a little bit. Before I do that, I would like you to play a clip that I sent you, Jeff, about this, about the pure insanity of thinking that this general government is going to rein itself in. After we hear that, I'm not going to be going to a break. After we hear that, I'll go into my analysis of this issue of our general government in California.
Here's what we're supposed to do when the federal government violates our rights. When faced with unconstitutional or just plain bad federal policy, people generally try three things. They contact representatives in Congress in the hopes that federal politicians will limit federal power. Or they sue in federal court and hope the politically connected federal lawyers who serve as judges will limit federal power. Or they go to the polls to vote the bums out with the hope that the new federal politicians won't be bums too, and they'll limit federal power. When you stop to think about it, none of this makes any sense at all. They're asking Washington, D.C. to fix itself, which never seems to happen. Even Alexander Hamilton understood this. When confronted with the question of how the people would guard their liberties if the new government violated them, Hamilton didn't recommend doing anything at the national level. In Federalist Paper number 28, he said the solution would lie with the states. He wrote, "It may safely be received as an axiom in our political system that the state governments will, in all possible contingencies, afford complete security against invasions of the public liberty by the national authority."
All right. Thank you very much for playing that, Jeff. Let me start with the first assertion that we think it's going to do you any good to contact your representatives. I used to do a radio show with Mark Kreslins, and he was a senior legislative assistant for some time in Washington, D.C., and he was very open about the fact that you could write your representatives and the assistants would see it and just send back a form response, a just canned reply, and he knew as a fact that the representative you were trying to contact and share your opinion with never, ever saw your opinion. You can sue in federal court. When you do something like that, we end up with more egregious behavior from our runaway federal judiciary. As I mentioned earlier, we can thank Roe versus Wade and the Supreme Court for, again, 60 million babies and dead babies and counting. States have tried to stop this. We're trying to stop this now in the state of Oklahoma. And this, what you're seeing now is, again, suing the federal court has brought us, thank you NRA for incorporating the Second Amendment against the states, where now we're seeing the federal judiciary extend national control over firearms, which, as we know, was a matter that was reserved to the states. Going to the polls, well, we're going to vote someone in. We're going to keep voting, coping, hoping. What we're seeing now is a classic example of more politicians that have no respect for the constitutional restraints that was imposed upon them. So Alexander Hamilton, of all people, even recognized that the states were the ones to keep this general government in check. So that's what we're seeing in California. So let's talk a little bit about the Supremacy Clause, because what we're seeing here is a misunderstanding, and it's very common. The Supremacy Clause is Article 6, Section 2, I believe, that says that the laws of the Constitution and the Constitution and the laws of the United States are the supreme law of the land. But what people don't understand is it really says the Constitution and the laws of the United States shall be made in pursuance thereof, meaning only laws that are made in pursuance thereof to the Constitution shall have effect. So here are the supreme laws of the land. So what happens when they make a law, the general government, the Congress makes a law that they are not authorized to make pursuant to Article 1, Section 8? Well, then what we have to do is look to the states to resolve this issue. So what I want to do now is turn to whether or not there exists constitutional authority to regulate immigration by the general government. And this is something I had a debate with one of the co-hosts on my morning show that I co-host on Tuesdays, who said that the federal government absolutely can regulate immigration, naturalization, and that this is up for them to do. And what I tried to explain to them is there's a difference between the two. I want to refer you to my article in the 10th Amendment Center. It's called The Constitutional Solution to Immigration. And here's where the confusion is. In Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 of the United States Constitution, Congress is empowered to establish uniform rules of naturalization. But naturalization means who may become a United citizen and who may enter the nation's borders, nations being, at the time, was of each state. So if you want to take this as one United State of America, well, then that is why they have asserted the right to regulate immigration. So again, according to the Constitution as ratified, the general government only had the authority to rule on what we would call a path to citizenship, we can say. So the use of the word nation here is really problematic, and it is the heart of the issue when one considers the history of the founding of our current system. So again, as I mentioned to at the beginning of the show, that the Constitution was signed by 13 sovereign and independent states, and they never gave that up. So what does this mean in terms of immigration? It means the authority to determine citizenship in the Union as a whole rests with the general government. Again, that was one of the enumerated powers. But the power to control immigration remains with the states. Naturalization and immigration are two entirely separate issues. Today, the federal nature of the American system of government has been dismantled, and the states are now secondary to the whole. And this is, again, like I said earlier, the complete opposite that the government was consented to at the time of the ratification. So how has this become a national issue? And much like any other unconstitutional expansion of the general government, it has been through a deliberate misinterpretation of the Constitution. So such misinterpretations consistently result in the expansion of the scope and power of the national government. So you can read that. We'll post that again. That's in the 10th Amendment Center. And you can read a little bit more on your own. So what is it we can do? Well, there's something called nullification. Another 10th Amendment article, 10th Amendment Center article, is called Nullification, Defending Liberty from Federal Tyranny. And again, that's something that we talk about all the time. And this is an article that starts out in 1798. John Adams and the Federalist Congress passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. And we refer to this all the time when we talk about nullification. Many believe them to be a violation of the federal government's clearly defined powers of the U.S. Constitution, and that's correct. Shortly after the passage, several private citizens critical of the Federalist Party-controlled government found themselves charged, indicted, convicted, and jailed in federal courts. Well, in response, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson drafted the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions of 1798, respectively. In the Virginia resolutions, Madison reemphasizes where the powers of the federal government come from, as well as defends the right of the states to interpose themselves between the federal government and the authorities, rights, and liberties of the states and the people. So here right away, from the get-go, we're seeing a conflict where the general government that was formed by the states is throwing off its yokes. And at the time, the states were asserting themselves here, and our founders were still around to speak the truth. Now their message is being obfuscated through false narratives of history. Madison argues that the states have the right to determine the constitutionality of any federal laws, and in so doing, the states are duty-bound to stop any abuses of the federal government. So not only is it an option for them, but it is actually a duty. The reason for this is simple. The article says the states created the federal government and delegated its powers in the Constitution, and as a result, they have a duty to keep the powers of the federal government in check. And we're not seeing that anymore right now because of what we call the new federalism, where they have the general government issuing grants or withholding said grants if the states fail to comply with their edicts. So Madison wrote the Alien and Sedition Acts passed the last session of Congress, the first of which exercises a power where nowhere delegated to the federal government, and by which uniting legislative and judicial powers to those executive subverts the general principles of free government. And that was really our revolutionary legacy, is to have a government to which we consented where we have representations. Let me just go into a little bit of the Kentucky resolutions, where Thomas Jefferson echoes Madison's concerns over the consolidation and expansion of federal power. I say it all the time. Before the ink was even dry on the parchment, they were they were jumping the shark and ignoring their restraints. I think that this was a Trojan horse. The states were lied to, and this is a result, a culmination of these lies. Jefferson writes, the general government is the exclusive judge of the powers delegated to it. Stop nothing short of despotism, since the discretion of those who administer the government and not the Constitution would be the measure of their powers. Think back now on what Michael Bolden said in that clip we played earlier. Jefferson understood that federal courts would ultimately side with the federal government, sound familiar, in matters of its authority, but even Jefferson couldn't have imagined how prescient his words would become. I've said time and time again, these guys were really prophetic. Regarding the rights of the states, Jefferson's language was even stronger than Madison's, where Madison claimed the states were duty-bound to oppose unconstitutional federal power. Jefferson writes with no equivocation that the states who form the Constitution are sovereign and independent and have the unquestionable right to determine the constitutionality of federal acts. Furthermore, Jefferson argues the rightful remedy to such an infraction is nullification. That is, for the states to invalidate any federal acts it has deemed unconstitutional. So this is something that goes all the way back. It has been up to the states to interpose and nullify unconstitutional federal acts. And we're just not seeing the states do that. And that's why we're having this issue in California. So based on what we've discussed so far, we cannot but conclude that California is in the right here. We may not like it. There's a difference also. I've heard this called before, this illegal immigration, as being an invasion. Well, it's an invasion. It's not immigration. Well, if we were being invaded, Congress would declare war, and these would then be alien enemies. We don't have a war with Mexico right now, so under the rule of the law, these are alien friends. The general government doesn't have any authority to regulate them. I want to also refer you to an article, another one by the 10th Amendment Center, and this one is a little bit older, but it discusses a paper that was published in a Case Western Reserve Law Review by a gentleman named Ernest Young. And I typically don't like to quote law school professors, but this one actually gets it right. And he says that nullification is dead, but it is still you can still use it as a powerful tool to check federal overreach. And the answer lies, how can this be, in the two distinct definitions of nullification. While legal nullification, as laid out by John Calhoun, may be dead. Now, Sessions referred to John Calhoun, which is why I'm bringing this article up. He argues that nullification through non-cooperation, which was recommended by James Madison in Federalist 46, remains a powerful means to confront overreaching federal authority. And that would be the 10th Amendment Center defines nullification as any act or set of acts which renders a law null, void, or just unenforceable. So what we really have to do is stop cooperating with the states. And he makes a powerful case, Young, back in his paper here, for nullification based on non-cooperation by closely examining. He uses marijuana legislation, for instance, in Colorado and Washington. They were the first two states to legalize marijuana for recreational use, despite complete federal marijuana prohibition. Just as an aside, when the general government wanted to prohibit the use or possession of alcohol, they did it by a constitutional amendment process, as well as the repealing of the former amendment. And that was never done with regards to marijuana. They've just decided we're going to do what we want. We're not going to go through the amendment process. So we're just going to have our own constitutional Article 5 conventions, but we're not going to invite the states. So we have now federal marijuana law is supposedly the supreme law of the land, but I submit to you it's not, because there's no authority for it. But the feds don't have the resources to maintain this prohibition. So because the federal authorities depend on the state officials to enforce federal law, state officials have opportunities to influence the shape of federal regulation and sometimes to resist aspects of federal policy they do not like. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the heart and soul of federalism. That is exactly the type of government that was consented to at the ratification conventions. And if you want to understand what the Constitution means, that's where you have to look. You don't have to look to, in fact, the last place you want to look is to what a federal court, a member of the federal judiciary, says the Constitution means, because honestly, they learn, and what I call this the malfeasance of the legal education system, is they learn by case law. The Constitution means what federal judges and the landmark decisions have all been leftist-leaning, particularly New Deal era judges, have interpreted the Constitution with regards to pointing it in a way to promote their policy-driven outcomes. So this is why we really have to stop turning to the courts. And he talks about anti-commandeering, explaining how the principle established by Justice Joseph Story in 1842 creates a legal framework for supporting nullification through non-cooperation. Well, what exactly have we just seen in California? Non-cooperation. What we saw was the mayor of Oakland warning the people that they want in their community that the federal government, in contravention to the United States Constitution, the Article 1, Section 8, and to the 10th Amendment, are coming to arrest the people that they want there. They said they're diverse, they're important to that community, and the general government is coming to arrest them. They not only did not cooperate, but they got in the way. So now Jeff Sessions is citing Lincoln and the Civil War, and to me, this is a very thinly veiled threat of an attack. So let's now talk about a little bit about the issue of secession, because he said there is no secession. So let's back up. When I said that these 13 and free and independent states came together after signing a treaty independently with the King of England, formed a new government, they ratified a constitution. Three of them were concerned that, many of them were concerned, but three in particular were concerned that if this government fails to suit their needs, could they abolish it or could they leave? Now, the freedom or the ability to abolish a government that no longer fulfills its legitimate role as to defending liberties should be thrown off. That, again, is something that goes back to the Declaration of Independence. These are our founding principles. So 3 states were concerned before ratification and wanted reassurances that they could leave, meaning secede, if they decided that, hey, this just isn't working out. So that was New York, I believe, Rhode Island, and Virginia. Those terms were accepted under the Equal Footing Doctrine. When those terms were accepted, they applied to all the states. So here's a question that was presented. Is secession legal? And this was a little bit further down the road. And I'm going to read this answer. I'm going to read the answer to this question directly by the quote. Any people, anywhere, being inclined and having the power, have the right to rise up and shake off the existing government and form a new one that suits them better. This is a most valuable, a most sacred right, a right which we hope and believe is to liberate the world. Nor is this right confined to cases in which the whole people of an existing government may choose to exercise it. Any portion of such people that may revolutionize and make their own of so much of the territory as they inhabit. Jeff, who said this?
Honestly, I don't know. I've never heard that quote, unless it's I'm guessing that it's somebody in the 20th century.
Abraham Lincoln, January 12th, 1848.
Well, then wrong century too.
Speech at the United States House of Representatives. But oh my goodness. So now Jeff is channeling Jeff Sessions, not the good Jeff.
Thank you.
Jeff Sessions channeling his inner Lincoln as a result of the war against Southern independence is making a very thinly veiled threat to what? Is he going to call in bombers, and is he going to invade the state of California over this issue? He's suing them right now. What if they lose the lawsuit? What if they lose the lawsuit in a federal court? Then what? Is he going to call in the bombers? Let's see what happens. What if Dan Fisher is elected in Oklahoma and they decide to make human abortion a criminal offense, which is something he promised to do? If the duly elected legislators follow that and make that law, and he signs it into law before the ink is dry, there will be a federal court injunction prohibiting this, and people will be will they be standing outside the abortuariums, or will the federal government be there forcing these people to clear the way so babies can be killed? This is a showdown. California is about to have a showdown. What's going to happen? So, I'm not pleased that babies have to die to have this issue, this showdown. But let's look at the issue now with immigration. Again, they have absolutely no more authority to regulate immigration than they do abortion. And as for the claim that there is no secession, yes, it was legal at the time the Constitution was ratified. Secession was entirely legal when the Confederate States of America was formed, when they left the Union. Because of a case, Texas versus White, saying secession is illegal, that has no ruling. If you need to amend the Constitution as ratified, you must do so via Article 5. So you must have an Article 5 convention and then the amendment ratified by 3/4 of the states saying secession is not legal. If you do not do that, secession has been and continues to be legal. So the feds are 100% wrong here. And Jeff, you sent me, here's something what somebody commented, and you sent me this. This battle was fought, and this is exactly what Jeff Sessions is saying and the administration. This battle was fought. The states who placed their law against the federal law and the Constitution lost. The Union, federal, has absolute authority to legislate immigration laws. Our state and local government are by no means accountable to carry out the federal laws. Local sheriff can refuse to assist the federal agencies for any number of reasons. What our state and local agencies cannot do is obstruct any federal agency from carrying out its duty. Criminal, illegal aliens who have broken our federal laws are being assisted by the states and law enforcement to avoid deportation, obstruction. And this, unfortunately, Jeff, is really the way the majority of even conservatives see the role and the how the powers are divided in this union of independent, sovereign, and independent nations. And the problem with immigration is people say, well, they come to one state. If California wants to flood their state with Mexicans, that's fine. The problem being they go other places. So when that happens, you know, it doesn't matter where they go because federal benefits follow them from state to state. So we have to stop these federal benefits. And I mentioned this in my article about immigration laws. If these states that want these immigrants to come in of their own accord and to stay there, they don't have the authority to make them United States citizens, but they certainly have the right to decide who lives within their territorial borders. They must bear the financial burden of having them there. And if they truly say that these people are a benefit to the economy and to the community, then it shouldn't be a financial burden for them, and they shouldn't need money from the general government in that regard. So what we have here is this bleeding federalism that permeates the states like a rust. It's a magnet for people to come here illegally and then go to other states that may not favor the problems that we're seeing associated with mass migration into these states. And I'm not going to say illegal immigration because if the states want them there, it's legal. Did you want to say something, Jeff?
Yes, I wanted to go back to something you said and back to that post I sent you. First off, a war does not end your natural right. We have a natural right, and that's where this whole idea that Jefferson presented in the Declaration is out of, that we have a natural right to self-determination and free association. So we can associate under a government with those that we choose to. At the same time, so the war, the Civil War did not end that natural right. We were still retain those natural rights just because the North won didn't take those natural rights away. First. Second, you said something about the an Article 5 convention to add a law in the Constitution forbidding secession. And I know where you're going. I completely understand what you were saying. But my take of that would be it still does not change the fact that I have a natural right to free association and self-determination. So if the government is destructive of the ends of liberty, I would still have the natural right inside of me to form a group of people in an area, as you said from Lincoln's quote, and secede. Even if they pass a law, it doesn't change it. Even if the court says you can't, it doesn't change it. They can't regulate your natural rights. We have them, and I'm taking up the last. We have just 3 minutes left there, Suzanne. I'll shut up and let you finish up that idea.
That's absolutely right. I have been saying this from the very beginning that this nationalism, this sense of nationalism, has been the absolute scourge. It is at the root cause of everything that right now is causing all of our problems. And you know, this is something we need to get away from. We need to get back to the concept, and I've talked about this with regards to these school shootings. Solve these problems locally. We have to think locally, solve our problems at a local community level, because that way we will have a chance of self-representation. And if we don't have that, then we're going to go to what Michael Bolden said, you know, voting, hoping, coping, trying to get new people in, seeking redress from the federal judiciary, who is often left-leaning and will always decide with in favor of of continuing their own power in perpetuity. So we have to get away from this nationalism. I'll have to post also again our article on nationalism, or Church of the National Government. We worship this government, particularly the left right now. And the funny thing is, they are seeking to disarm citizens and arm the government that they proclaim to hate. They're calling Donald Trump Hitler. They're saying that this government is evil, but they want to hand over all the guns to this very government. It makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. And, you know, this is the thing. We have to understand what has happened right now is in direct contravention to our founding principles. If you think that what we are doing is a good idea, again, we've surrendered our right to govern ourselves. We've surrendered our revolutionary legacy. This is really a big deal, and it's disconcerting. And it's one of the reasons that this is going to be one of my topics when I go speak at the Sons of Confederate Veterans Education Day. Somebody had asked me once, why are you still complaining about a man that died 150 years ago? Well, if you read Brian McClanahan's book, it goes back even further than that. If you want to see who really set in stone, despite his issues or despite his claims, it would be up to the states to check the federal government. It would be Alexander Hamilton, Abraham Lincoln. These people have turned the system upside down where the states are superfluous. We have lost our ability to represent ourselves. So please keep that in mind when we talk about this issue, even though conservatives, so-called conservatives, are inclined to hate the People's Republic of California. In this instance, they are in the right. This has been the Wasatch Report. Suzanne Sherman, Jeff Johnson joining me today on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny.